Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling a question that's been a real head-scratcher for historians for centuries. How does a civilization that went toe-to-toe with ancient Egypt, an empire that built massive cities and pioneered new tech, just vanish from history for 3,000 years?
Right? Let's dive into that by exploring the story of the Hittites, one of the great powers of the Bronze Age. And you'll see, their story isn't just about a mysterious collapse. It's about an incredible rise, a really complex society, and a legacy that was almost completely forgotten. You see, for the longest time, all we really knew about them came from a few scattered mentions in the Bible. But then, in 1834, a French scholar stumbled upon some strange ruins in Turkey. He had no idea at the time, but he just kicked off the rediscovery of a lost empire. Still, the true scale of their power would remain a puzzle for decades to come.
So, where did this superpower even come from? Well, their story gets started right in the heart of modern-day Turkey. But the real question is, how did they go from just a bunch of small city-states to a full-blown empire?
Yeah, these early records tell us the Hittites didn't just pop up out of nowhere. They really grew out of this collection of smaller kingdoms in Anatolia during the Middle Bronze Age, slowly but surely taking over and uniting city-states, sometimes through war, sometimes through politics.
And here's something that's just fascinating. The language they spoke, which they called nešili, turned out to be the earliest written branch of the Indo-European language family. Now, that's a huge group of related languages that includes most languages in Europe and many in Asia. So believe it or not, the Hittite tongue is a distant, ancient cousin to English, Spanish, Russian, and even Hindi.
Okay, so one of the most important guys in this early period is a king named Anitta. He was a great conqueror, no doubt, building a bigger kingdom from all these little states. But he was also completely ruthless. And this is where the story gets a crazy twist of irony. The very city that would become the heart of the entire Hittite empire was first conquered, burned to the ground, and publicly cursed by one of their own founding kings. Wow, you can just feel the power in that curse, can't you? And yet, despite this very serious threat from their own ancestor, the location of Hattusa was just too good to pass up. Less than 100 years later, it was rebuilt and became the Hittite capital, basically defying the Stormgod himself. So, how did they do it? How did the Hittites go from a cursed city to a formidable empire? Well, it really came down to their unique social structure, some pretty innovative laws, and a real knack for technology. Hittite society was a classic pyramid. Right at the top, you've got the king. And he wasn't just the ruler, he was also the head priest and top general. The gods themselves supposedly gave him the right to rule. Below him, you had the nobles, the bureaucrats keeping all the records, the craftsmen making everything, and of course, the farmers who fed everybody. But here's what really set them apart. Their laws. I mean, we've all heard of the famous Babylonian code, right? The whole an eye for an eye thing. The Hittites, they were different. They focused on restitution, not revenge. For most crimes, the goal was to make the victim whole again. That's a surprisingly modern way of thinking for the ancient world. Now, there's this old idea that the Hittites had some kind of secret iron monopoly that made them invincible. That's probably a myth. But they were absolutely pioneers in smelting it. Their early mastery of ironworking gave them a huge economic and military advantage, letting them make stronger tools and weapons than their neighbors, who were still mostly using bronze. This kind of growing power, well, it was bound to cause some friction. And it wasn't long before the Hittites came into direct conflict with the other superpower of the age, the new kingdom of Egypt. And the collision point was a place called Kadesh in modern-day Syria. The battle was just immense. We're talking 5,000 to 6,000 chariots crashing across the plains. It was a bloody tactical mess. Both sides got hammered, and both kings, Muwatalli II and Ramesses the Great, went home and immediately declared a huge victory on all their monuments. But instead of just fighting until they both collapsed, these two superpowers did something amazing. They chose diplomacy. The Treaty of Kadesh is the oldest peace treaty that we have the complete text for. And this wasn't just some let's stop fighting note. It was a sophisticated pact that set up borders, a defense alliance, and was even sealed with a marriage between a Hittite princess and the pharaoh himself. This was the absolute high point of Hittite power. But then it all fell apart. Just a few generations after that incredible diplomatic achievement, the Hittite Empire vanished. The whole thing, which had stood for 500 years, just ceased to exist. So what on earth happened? How could a civilization so powerful just disappear? And look, This wasn't just a Hittite problem. Historians call it the Late Bronze Age collapse. It was a widespread catastrophe. Great cities burning, trade routes just gone. Entire civilizations were plunged into a dark age. And for the Hittites, it was total. Their amazing capital, Hattusa, was violently destroyed and never lived in again. For years, everyone pointed the finger at these mysterious invaders mentioned in Egyptian texts, the Sea Peoples. And yeah, they definitely played a role, but that single explanation just started to feel too simple. Internal conflicts probably weakened the empire, but now new research is pointing to a much bigger, more fundamental cause.
And this is where the science gets really cool. Researchers analyzed tree rings from ancient juniper wood found right in the Hittite heartland. And what they discovered was just astonishing. Crystal clear evidence of 3 back-to-back devastating years of drought, from 1198 to 1196 BCE. That date lines up perfectly with the empire's final collapse.
I mean, a drought that severe would have been absolutely catastrophic. We're talking massive crop failures, famine, and the complete breakdown of the economy that held the Hittite state together. So what about those Sea Peoples? Well, in this light, they start to look less like mysterious pirates and more like desperate migrants and refugees, victims of the exact same climate crisis that brought down the Hittites.
The story of the Hittites is so much more than just ancient history. It's a powerful and honestly a pretty sobering reminder of how fragile even the mightiest empires can be, vulnerable to forces way beyond their control. It really makes you think, doesn't it? Drought, mass migration, broken supply chains. What can this story from 3,000 years ago teach us today?